Thank you very much, Malcolm, and hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. Well, I first heard about the Bedford Theatre in Camden Town when about 20 years or so ago, John Cowley and I started interviewing local people who'd grown up in the Camden Town area where we live. And some of them remembered going to the Bedford Theatre when they were children. So I wanted to find out more about it. And I discovered that the Bedford Theatre used to be one of the landmarks of Camden Town. And for over a century, it was really the place to go in Camden for a good night out, whether it was to see a music hall or a film or even a Shakespeare play. But it's now over 70 years since the Bedford closed its doors for the last time. So what I'd like to do in this talk is give you a brief history of the Bedford in its several incarnations, let you hear local people tell their stories about going to the Bedford through interviews, which John Cowley and I have been doing over the years, and also give you a flavour of the sort of entertainments that you might have seen there. And I must mention that one of the key sources of information for this talk was a dissertation by Jean Aston, which you can find at the Camden Local Studies and Archives Centre in the library in Theobald's Road, which Tudor Allen kindly provided for me, along with, he provided me with much other very useful material. There's also was a Camden history review about it, I think in issue 19. Right. So can everybody hear me okay? Good. Just like to check that. Where exactly was the Bedford then? Well, it stood about, we'll have a look at a Google map here. It stood about halfway up Camden High Street, just south of the junction with Delancey Street, stretching right back to Arlington Road. Sadly, there's nothing left to see of it today. I took this photograph a couple of years ago. There is a plaque on Arlington Road, but I'm not going to hold long on that because, in fact, most of the dates on that plaque are actually wrong. Now, this sketch is titled The New Bedford, as you can see at the bottom. But why the New Bedford? And what was the Old Bedford? Well, in fact, various different places of entertainment have stood on this same site. And it's really appropriate that we're looking back at it now in 2024, because the story goes back just 200 years to 1824. If we look at this map, we know that Camden Town was originally developed in the late 18th century, and by the 1820s, it had begun to expand and was attracting a new professional middle class. And these people wanted somewhere to spend their leisure time. And so in 1824, the Bedford Arms Tavern and Tea Garden was established on this site off Arlington Road. And you can just make it out on this map of 1834, 10 years later. If I zoom in there, you can just see highlighted, you can just read Bedford Arms. So tea gardens were popping up all over London. And this drawing by George Cruikshank gives a feel for the holiday atmosphere of such places. And the Bedford was a place where you could get more than just tea. You could have ale, coffee, and shrimps, and it had a tree-lined garden with a bowling green. And unlike the more working-class customers who later patronized the late Victorian music halls, tea gardens were respectable places where ladies could be seen, especially on Sundays. And sometimes you could even watch a balloon ascent from the tea garden. There was something of a craze for ballooning in the 1820s, and in 1825, Mr. Graham and his wife took off from the garden of the Bedford. But by the 1830s, change was in the air, and Camden Town was becoming much more working class. The Regent's Canal, as we know, opened in 1820, and the railways were attracting industry and commerce to the area. Euston Station opened in 1837. So in 1839, that's our next important date, in 1839, the Bedford did what a lot of London taverns were doing. They expanded the hall at the back of the tea garden and turned it into what was called a song and supper room, or song saloon, where customers could get up and sing or do a comic turn and maybe get a free drink for their efforts. And again, George Cruikshank gives you a real flavour in this drawing of what that was like. And in fact, this was the birth of what would become music hall. And this was happening all over London. Now, this is an illustration of the Green Gate Tavern in City Road. And you can see that it's got more of the feeling of a small theatre. There's a proscenium arch at the back. Some people are sitting, looking at the stage. Some are standing at the back, drinking and chatting and so on. Well, at the Bedford, this was becoming so popular that eventually something bigger and better was needed than this song and supper room. And so in 1861, the next really important date, in 1861, at a cost of £5,000, a new purpose-built building was erected, which meant that the Bedford now became a proper licensed theatre. By this time, theatres had to be licensed. And it was described as this new and elegant lyric establishment. And if you glance down there, you can see some of the names of the people who were going to be appearing there. Well, the Bedford went through various changes of ownership in the second half of the 19th century. According to one source, it nearly lost its license early on in 1865 due to the poor construction of the wooden columns which supported its galleries. So apparently they replaced them with iron ones, and then the license was granted. Well, we don't have any pictures, or I've found no pictures of the old Bedford, of the exterior of the old Bedford, but luckily we can see what it was like inside, as the famous Camden town artist, Walter Sickert, was a frequent visitor. You might have seen the wonderful Sickert exhibition at the Tate Gallery a couple of years ago. Sickert himself, I learned this from the catalogue of the gallery. Sickert himself had been an actor when he was young, and he loved the theatre, especially musicals. He was starstruck from a young age. Now, in 1890, Sickert painted one of his favourite performers, Vesta Victoria, she was called. And you can just see her in the top right-hand corner of this painting by Sickert. Well, Vesta Victoria was one of the most famous stars of the music hall stage. She performed from the 1870s right through to the late 1930s. In fact, Sickert too carried on working into the 1930s. And the newspaper The Stage noted an early appearance of Vesta Victoria at the Bedford, a very pretty young lady. Her singing and dancing are of an unusually high order and elicited loud applause. Now, some years after this painting, Vesta Victoria was captured on film in 1907, so early days of cinema, singing a famous music hall song. And it's one which she must have sung many times at the Bedford. So here's our first flavour of what you might have seen at the Bedford.
I'm in a nice bit of trouble, I confess. Somebody with me has had a gay. I should by now be a proud and happy bride, but I've still got to keep my fingernails. I was proposed to by Obadiah beat in a very gentlemanly way. Lent him all my money so that he could buy the home, and punctually at 12 o'clock today, there was I, waiting at the church, waiting at the church, waiting at the church, when I found he left me in the lurch. Lord, how it did upset me. All at once, he sent me round a note. Here's the very note. This is what he wrote. Can't get away to marry you today. My wife won't let me.
Well, there you have Leicester Victoria, not actually filmed at the Bedford, but giving you a flavour of what might have been seen there. This painting by Sickert is called The Pit at the Old Bedford. Well, tickets there were sixpence, 6 old pence, of course, and a shilling, and every man could bring 2 women guests for free. Well, the modernised music halls now preferred to be called palaces of variety. So they'd already come a long way from the old song and supper rooms of a few decades earlier. And it wasn't long before the Bedford needed updating and modernising again. One of the problems was that it didn't have a frontage onto Camden High Street. The entrance was in an alley at the side. You can still see the alleyway there today. And so, next important date, in 1898, the enterprising new owners managed to purchase the adjacent shops on the High Street, and they pulled down the old Bedford, and within a few months, the theatre was completely rebuilt as the Bedford Palace of Varieties, which is what we can see here. So this new Bedford had a grand opening on Monday, the 6th of February, 1899. The architect was Bertie Crewe, who was one of the main architects of places of entertainment in the period, and it was lit by electricity with gas and oil lamps as a standby. And Sickert painted the interior of the new Bedford too. There we are. Now, the Camden and Kentish Town and St Pancras Gazette wrote in 1899 that at last Camden Town has a place of entertainment to be proud of. And it went on to praise the frontage on the High Street, which we can see here. And this is what they said. The new theatre presents a French Renaissance front to the High Street, executed in Dorking stone, with polished labradite and red shap granite pilasters, surmounted by slate mansard roofs and a copper dome rising some 60 feet above street level. And in this photograph, which I'm going to show you now, you can see the entrance on the High Street of the Bedford. You can just make out Theatre of Variety there and the name Bedford just above it. So the Bedford entered the 20th century with a new theatre at the golden age of the music hall. And the period was recreated in the British colour film Trotty True. This film was made in 1949. Now, it would be very nice to believe, and I did think at one time, that it was filmed inside the Bedford Palace of Varieties, the new Bedford, 50 years after the theatre opened. But the sources are unclear about this. A lot of the written sources suggest that it was recreated in the studio, and that probably is more likely. Possibly, I think some of the shots of the audience might have been shot in the actual theatre and the performance done in the studio. We just don't know, and there aren't the people around to tell us. But in any event, it's a really good recreation of what the Bedford was like. I'm going to show you just a brief clip which shows Trotty True starting as a child prodigy and turning into a star of the period, played by Jean Kent, singing appropriately The Kid from Camden Town. And if you look at the poster in the background and backstage, you'll see it's headed The Bedford Palace of Varieties. So here we see, let's have a look at this film.
So many exciting moments.
Your face may lose Oh, there's sunshine after rain, and then gladness follows pain. You'll be happy once again. Never mind. Sunshine after rain, and the gladness follows pain. You'll be happy once again. Never mind. The great little Tessie. I'm better than what she is. I'm the great little Trotty.
You talked me into this. I'll never be able to face the neighbours again.
Trotty's a bit of all right, Lil. And will the boys like her?
That'll be enough, Uncle Sam. My Trotty's a good girl.
If you want to catch cold, put that round your shoulders. What's the matter, you nervous? Oh, my. Always am.
You're kidding.
It's a fact. I always get nerves before I go on. If I don't, no good when I get out there.
Look, that's me. Only they've got my billing wrong. I'm the great little Trotty, really.
Oh, you can, Now, listen, Ebba. You've got to be great first, see?
You're on, Trotty. Run round the back of the stage. You come on from the other side, lovey.
All right, now, tip those shoulders back. Back. Go out there and knock them cold. Go on.
Now.
No?
She'll be all right, Lil.
When I was dressed my Sunday best and walking up the street, Mrs. Brown came hurrying down and said, "You do look sweet."
Blimey, it's a baby! Does your mother know you're out? She's for it. Where's your mom?
She's sitting right beside you, so you better look out or she'll wallop you. Come on, Charles, we'll have the chorus. Now, come on, everybody. Sing! I'm Trotty, the kid from Camden town. My name and my nature true. That's right.
Trotty in good form tonight?
Never better.
For the naughty wink and the saucy sway, I make the pit and the gods obey. When I sing Aurora, nothing should keep me down. They're all potty, the kid from Camden town. They're all potty over Trotty too, the kid from Camden
Well, yes, I think somebody spotted there in the chat that that walk was filmed in Gloucester Crescent, I think. And I'm sure you all spotted Bill Owen and Sam Kidd in the background there, stalwarts of British films of the period. So in the early Edwardian period, the Bedford Palace of Varieties was bringing an increased sophistication to its audience, we might say. And in 1914, the practice of drinking in the music hall was prohibited by the London County Council. In its heyday, many big stars appeared at the Bedford. Charlie Chaplin appeared here in 1912, just before he left for Hollywood. And Mary Lloyd, who we see here, was a favorite for many years. And in 1920, she performed here for her 50th birthday. Sadly, she died shortly afterwards. Belle Elmore performed at the Bedford. She was a minor music hall figure, but she gained notoriety as the murdered wife of Dr. Crippen. In 1929, a 5-year-old Peter Sellers was living above the theatre while his parents were appearing there in a revue called Ha Ha Ha. And from the beginning of the century, it even showed short silent films, which was a taste of things to come, as we'll see. Well, this new form of entertainment, the cinema, was gradually taking over from the music hall as the working class's favourite form of mass entertainment. And by 1914, there were no less than 10 cinemas operating in Camden Town and Kentish Town alone. And then in 1929 came talking pictures, and the new cinemas being opened were so much more luxurious and sophisticated compared to the now somewhat shabby and faded elegance of the likes of the Bedford. And here we have a film poster, because seemingly inevitably, in 1933, the Bedford became a cinema, fitted out with the latest sound system. And this poster from 1930 is from 1937. And here's a clip of Eleanor Powell in that film, Born to Dance, bringing some Hollywood glamour onto the screen at the Bedford. But the Bedford also showed homegrown films, like this one starring George Formby. Keep Your Seat, Please.
There's a catchword getting on the trains, it's the latest craze. Everybody says, hold tight, keep your seats, please. If the bus should skid, you'll get it through going down the hill, waiting for the spell. Hold tight, keep your seats, please. What a sensation, talk of the nation, how it travels round. Even the Hindus, Kaffers and Zulus, they've all got it. Hear 'em holler it, the brakes won't work, the engine's busted too, the axle's spoken through, it's sticking into you, but hold tight, keep your seats, please.
Well, Keep Your Seats, Please turned out to be an appropriate title when it was shown in 1939, as in fact it was the last film to be shown at the Bedford. Because after the outbreak of the Second World War, the Bedford went back to being a live variety theatre. Here's a programme, and if we look inside, this is from 1941, it gives you a flavour of the sort of thing you might have seen there. I mean, look at that, glamour girls, butterfly catchers, Russian dance, can-can girls, and so on. Anyway, let's now have a look at some of the acts that you could have seen at the Bedford when it went back at the beginning of the war to being a live theatre. Now, these are clips which I found, they're not actually filmed at the Bedford, but all these acts performed at the Bedford. And the opening show on Boxing Day 1939 included Herschel Henlier, the riotous pianist. Let's have a look.
Gentlemen, you are glad to see me now? No. Yes, yes. And you see, my request, I get a little composition in the Barroso, and the son of Jerusalem was in the dance starting, and I see the composition, and then I'm going to put you the celebrated prelude, Barakmaninoff. Gentlemen, this will be very lovely now. No. Yes. A little classical music. And as you speak, like to change weather, my fingers is very cold this evening, and it's very hard to play with the cold fingers here. It's much better now. These things tickles me, I can't play with these things here, I better take off my kissler here, and I hope it doesn't shut the people here. Better take off my slippers, I can't pedal with the slipper here, I'll put this over here, it's much better. Don't get excited, gentlemen, the piano comes next. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. This must be just short here, and a little more here. It's much better. I'll get started here.
that was the flavour of some of the acts you might have seen at the Bedford, and it carried on as a variety theatre after the war. And this is where we can hear about it firsthand from people who remember visiting the Bedford. So let's hear from long-time local Camden Town residents, Kay and Louise Lieber, who John Cowley and I spoke to in 2017.
Well, the old Bedford.
Ah, the Bedford, yes.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't go there very often, but my father, who was a tailor, knew a lot of actors in the West End, because he worked in Monmouth Street, and he used to dress them times. And then we got tickets to go to the Bedford, and it was quite. What did we see at the Bedford, Kay? Can you remember?
No, it was cabaret, wasn't it?
It was cabaret more.
What was cabaret? Was that like a review? What was it?
Yeah, review. Who was it? Was so well known.
Oh God, names.
It could be quite. It's a wonder Dad let us go. Quite honestly, it's been dicey. And they had all these nude figures up by the stage. That was the setting, wasn't it? The decorative setting. It was quite a place, really.
It wasn't Max Miller you saw there or something?
It was Max Miller, yes, that's it. Yeah. And I can remember one very cold, it was a very cold winter's day that we went. Do you remember? Yeah. And we were crossing the road and we all fell down. It was so icy.
It was icy. But they pulled it down.
And they should never have pulled it down. It had too much history to be pulled down, but they did. Because, yeah, they had a lot of down and outs that got inside when they left, you know. And it got to such a state they had to pull it down, which is unfortunate, really.
Well, in 1946, the BBC television service, which had closed down during the war, reopened. And for a brief time, it looked as though this could prove the savour of the Bedford, as the BBC broadcast live variety shows from the Bedford over a series of Sunday nights. Now, there's no way of seeing these shows now because the technology to record television didn't exist then. Everything went out live and then disappeared forever. But the architects of the Radio Times, the archive of the Radio Times, which have just recently become available online, from them we can check what was broadcast. And here's an entry for the first broadcast from the Bedford in October 1946. And it's a programme called Variety on View. You can see it says there, televised direct from the Bedford Theatre, Camden Town. It's a little bit blurred, but this is blown up from the archive online of the Radio Times. And there was a photograph too, and you can see it features Richard Hearn, who was Mr. Pastry, and the 5 Dynamos. There's this sketch from 1946, you can just make out, and I'll go a bit closer in a minute, this is the Bedford, and then you can just make out a television camera in the background there. So that was the BBC doing a recording in 1946. So this was the Bedford carrying on the music hall tradition of a variety of mixture of comic and musical acts. Then in 1947, there was a change of content when the Bedford became a repertory theatre with the company showing plays. And one of these was televised too, Without the Prince by Philip King, which apparently was a comedy about an amateur production of Hamlet. And there again, we see at the top, a visit to the Bedford Theatre, Camden Town. Then in 1948, the famous actor-manager Donald Wolfett brought Shakespeare to the Bedford. The BBC didn't televise these, but local resident Caroline Illiff, who we went to speak to a few years ago, she remembers going to the Bedford and seeing this as a child. Let's hear from her.
I think at the time, we went to see one of the Donald Wolfett productions, but I certainly saw him at some point, and I also can remember thinking that there was he, the great actor-manager, with other actors around him, but he obviously was centre stage, even though he wasn't necessarily playing the main character, but he was always the presence on stage. I have a feeling that I saw him as the gravedigger. I can remember going up sort of rather dusty stairs to get to where we were sitting, and thinking that I didn't want to have to come down in a hurry. And I can remember the excitement of the curtain going up and the lights coming on and the actors coming onto the stage. A bit hazy about actually what I saw, but it was just all a new experience and very exciting. We're looking here at an etching by Walter Sickert.
Does the Bedford there look like the Bedford you remember?
It certainly does, and it also, yes, it does. Especially with the way that the people are looking at it too, because I can remember that this must have been the dress circle, and with people, or even the upper circle.
And that's where you were sitting.
Yes, but I get the feeling that the stage would have been somewhere there, and I think we would have been kind of looking directly at the stage. But yes, I mean that is definitely the Bedford Theatre. So I'm really pleased to have this. It's a picture that I pass every day as I go upstairs to my bedroom, and I look at it and remember the theatre.
Well, in 1949, the Bedford had new owners, Patricia Nye and John Penrose, and they redecorated the theatre, and they had a policy of putting on new plays and giving young actors and writers a chance. And here's a fascinating clip which came to light fairly recently on the BBC's new Rewind archive. This is something you can look at online. It's got some fascinating clips from all around the UK, all sorts of things. Anyway, this particular clip shows a party in 1949 to celebrate the launch of the Bedford as a family playhouse. The sound is not terribly good, but you can make it out.
The Bedford Theatre, Camden Town, comes back into its own again as your own family playhouse. One of the new owners, John Penrose, chats with the Mayor of St Pancras at a reception in the panel bar, brightly adorned with murals illustrating its gay old music hall background. Among the famous artists who have painted some of the pictures are Roger Ramsdell and Eunice Simmons. Gower Parks's offering to the panel bar is this, of the rollicking dandies who came to see Mary Lloyd, Dan Leno, and other stars of a bygone era. And now Hugh Skillen shows the mayor the startling doll-like heads he has painted. Off to a fine start with a good old melodrama, to be televised next Tuesday, the Bedford is all set for a new lease of life.
So after an absence of 2 years, BBC TV cameras returned to the Bedford because that good old melodrama to be televised next Tuesday was in fact a play called Lady Audley's Secret, Lady Audley's Secret, a play based on a sensational Victorian novel. Here's the programme for it. And the plot involves a bigamous heroine who deserts her child, pushes husband number 1 down a well, thinks about poisoning husband number 2, and sets fire to a hotel. Anyway, Pat Nye, one of the new owners, is playing Lady Audley. And it was televised live from the Bedford on Tuesday, the 25th of October, 1949 at 8:15. And here you can see it here. There it is. A visit to the Bedford Theatre, Camden Town, to see Lady Audley's Secret. And this new family theatre seemed like a new lease of life. In that same year, 1949, a young Dirk Bogarde appeared in the shock room. But unfortunately, Nye and Penrose couldn't make a go of it. And in February 1951, they were forced into liquidation. Now, originally, I thought that this was when the Bedford closed its doors for the last time, February 1951 or thereabouts. But a check through the Radio Times listing gives these music hall variety television shows from the Bedford being broadcast throughout 1951, with the last one in January 1952. And this is it. This is the last Radio Times listing for the Bedford, which must have gone out live, as I say. There was no way of recording it. So it looks as though the Bedford was given a reprieve, but only for a year. And so the Bedford closed its doors for the last time, though, as we'll see, it was still standing for another 16 years. It's a real shame that television or radio couldn't have saved it as a venue for live transmissions in front of an audience. Apparently in 1959, there was talk of the council acquiring the site for a library and civic centre. Whether they'd have kept the building, I don't know, but all that came to nothing. So over the years, the Bedford was allowed to go derelict. Now, another artist who sketched the Bedford many years after Walter Sickert was Geoffrey Fletcher. And in 1967, he wrote a short film based on his book, The London Nobody Knows, which gives us a rare glimpse inside the Bedford just before it was demolished. You may well have seen this film. It's circulating a lot now. It wasn't around for many years, but anyway, let's have a look at it again.
This theatre, the old Bedford in Camden Town, used to be the favourite theatre of Mary Lloyd, the famous music hall singer. Now it's just a mess. For the last few years it served as a shelter for pigeons and tramps and vagrants. Not a very good shelter either, because there's a bloody great hole in the roof and the rain comes pelting in. All the plaster decoration that used to be up there, pretty masks and the nymphs and shepherds and the fancy scroll work, is just a lot of rubble on the floor. When a theatre has served its purpose and there are no longer any people with inclination to come to it, by all means send for the wreckers, have it knocked down. But the sad thing about this place was that it was dead on its feet for so long, putrefying. Particularly sad because once upon a time it must have contained such a welter of laughter and life and joy. Because on this stage there appeared most of the great music hall artists of the time, and most of the not-so-great music hall artists, among whom you may find the name of Belle Elmore, whose ghost may very well still be flapping around backstage because she was the wife and eventual victim of Dr. Crippen, who was somewhere in Camden Town, not too far from this theatre, done the poor lady in. There's another reason for feeling very tender about this theatre, and that is that it was one of the favourite haunts of Walter Sickert. He used to come here night after night with his sketching pad on his knee and sketch away while Bessie Bellwood and Mary Lloyd would set the cockneys singing.
Oh, together now. The boy I love is loving the gallery.
These shots of the demolition of the Bedford in 1968 weren't in the original London Nobody Knows film. They came to light recently. I don't know who filmed them. They look like unedited footage to me, but they give an incredible sight of what was happening at the time. And This is the alleyway at that time in 1968, and then I took a photograph of it again a couple of years later. I'll start this again. There we are, that's how it looks today. Well, of course, there was another theatre in Camden Town, my Morning Present, which is still standing. The Camden Theatre was built in 1900, just the year after the New Bedford, and it offered classic theatre and musicals. But in 1913, it became the Camden Hippodrome Picture Theatre. So it became a cinema 20 years before the Bedford. And after World War II, it was used by the BBC to record radio shows like The Goons, which kept it going, obviously. And it's still standing today. Under it, there's an old poster for it under its current name, Coco, and it's survived a recent fire and it's got a new dome on it. So that was really the sad decline and loss of the Bedford Theatre. But I'd like to go back and before we finish and remember it when it was still going strong as a great place of live entertainment. We can do that through the reminiscences of Yvonne Osborne and Billy Osborne, who both remember going to the Bedford as children in the late 1940s. They didn't know one another as children then. They met later and got married and lived in Camden Square. And here's Yvonne, who John Cowley and I spoke to a couple of years ago.
I came to London from Kent in 1945 and I went to the Bedford Theatre, I would think in about 1946 with my father.
And how old were you then?
I would have been coming up to 9. And my father loved musicals. That was the reason we went to the Bedford, because Mum liked the cinema. I remember one act. They were like a ventriloquist. It was like a ventriloquist. He was called Harry Hemsley. And he used to sit behind a book or a newspaper and he had an imaginary family.
Daddy! Daddy!
That's Winnie's voice. What do you want, Winnie? Where are you?
Here I am on the settee.
Well, what do you want, dear?
I want you to show me the pictures in this book.
Oh, can't you see I'm busy reading, dear? Can't you look at the pictures by yourself?
I don't know what they mean.
And he had 2 little boys and a girl, and the younger boy was called Horace. But when he asked Horace a question, Horace could never answer. It would be all jabble. And he'd say to the bigger boy, and what did Horace say? And then from behind this paper or book, he would give an answer. So he was a ventriloquist behind a paper. He wasn't really a ventriloquist. I remember Ella Shields, Burlington Bertie from Bow. She was she was a female, but a male impersonator. And she always wore beautiful gloves. And in the song, she's like throws off her gloves. Burlington Bertie from Bow. I rise at 30, you know. I walk down the Strand with my gloves in my hand. I'm Burlington Bertie from Bow.
I'm Burlington Bertie. I rise at 10:30, then saunter along like a song. I walk down the Strand with my gloves on my hand. Then I walk down again with them on.
Max Wall, I do remember him, and he was saucy. And I can always remember thinking, being young, thinking this song very saucy. He's come out this night and he's doing all his gags. And then he said, got a little song now. And he started singing, oh, how we danced when we wed. We danced and we danced because we hadn't a bed. And I thought that's so funny. I mean, it doesn't sound fun, but when you're a kid and they're mentioning going to bed and weddings, that was saucy, wasn't it? That was risque. Yeah, I remember that. The straight plays at the Bedford come at the end of the time. At the beginning, it was mainly, you had chorus girls. Then you had all different acts. You had Max Miller with the funny walks. You had, then you had a compere in the middle. Between the 2 acts, a compere used to come on. And your programmes had a number on. So they used to call out a number and you might get a free ticket the next week. But also they'd ask silly things. My father was always up for a laugh. One day they said, if men never had flies with zips then, they had buttons. And it said the first man to come on the stage with a button off his fly, and my father sat and ripped the button off and got on the stage, and we had free tickets the next week. If my mother had been there, she'd have been horrified. But I mean, that was my dad. My father was a theatre, and I'm still a lover of live theatre, and my father was.
Well, that was Yvonne, and now lastly, let's hear from Billy Osborne, who John, Carly and I spoke to in 2008.
From the dairy, but Mary wouldn't fall in love with me.
The actual connection started I think it was the last year of the war. My mum got a job behind the running the bar actually in the Bedford. But I can remember the Bedford earlier than that, because opposite there was a council office where we had to go and get our ration books. And I can always remember standing outside in a queue with my mum holding her hand and looking across the road at the Bedford, which I didn't know was a theatre then. I had nothing at all to do with it. But when my mum got the job at the bar, part of the concessions was she used to get free tickets. So every Friday night, my dad and I used to toddle down there. He used to take me down there, sit me in about the third row in the stalls, see the first act and promptly leave me there, nice and safe. You couldn't do it nowadays, could you? And he'd go up the bar to see me mum. And during the interval, I would come up and I'd sit in the corner, and it was I can always remember being a very, very tiny bar. I mean, some of the big bars you see in theatres now, it's nowhere near as big as that. I've always loved the theatre, and it's always held a fascination for me. That's how it started off. It was a people's theatre basically, and as I say, I loved it because I used to meet some of the stars. I didn't know who they were really. There was only two that really stick in my mind. Was a guy who became quite a famous actor in British films called Bonacolino. I don't know whether you remember him. He always played American parts. In English war movies, he always played like the gunner or that in any of the American flying films they made over here. And what he was part of a tumbling act they were either called the Tumbling Colinos Acrobats or the Flying Colinos. He unfortunately got killed in a car crash. And then there was another act called, what were they called? Leon Cortez. He had an opera company, and it was such a funny act, but he got people involved because it was bringing opera to the people. And he used to tell the story of the opera, but in a funny way. So people would be roaring with laughter, but then they'd sing, duets or solos from the actual operas, and it really got people involved. But I can remember some of the acts, and I suppose it's sign of a misspent youth. The one act I can really remember, and I can remember it verbatim really, was Jane, which was she was a striptease artist, and based on the comic strip in the Mirror, Jane and Fritz. She was always partially clad, and she used to tour the musicals and do various sketches. And this sketch, I can remember sitting down there, all agog. I mean, you couldn't see anything from the stalls anyway, and it was done very well, but it was very risque for the time. I think you saw a bare shoulder or something like that at the worst. And the actual sketch was the curtains opened and she's in the bath, and Fritz was a little dash out, and it's all running round, and she's having a bowl, bubbles all over the place, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and come in, and in comes the maid, and she says, and this is what amazes me, I can remember it, as I say, verbatim. Miss Jane, your cousin Rodney's here. Shall I ask him to wait? She said, no, that's all right. She said, send Rodney in because he's blind. So she said, okay, Miss Jane. So anyway, Rodney comes in and he's the typical, what can you say, nerd, I suppose you'd call him. You know, he's standing there and he's got his striped blazer on, and he's standing there and he's all agog and he's talking directly to Jane, and they had this long conversation. And she says to him, so what do I owe this visit to, Jane? So he said, well, I've got some really good news to tell you. She said, what's that? He said, I've got my eyesight back. And that stuck in my mind right the way back from then, you know, absolutely fascinating. But I mean, the sort of people I saw there at the Bedford was Max Miller.
Hi, I'm here. Thanks very much. I expected more, but I'm satisfied. Blimey, you don't know what to wear this weather, do you, lady? It's raining again, Ducky. You all right in here? That's right. You'll be all right. Stay where you are. I know exactly what you're saying to yourselves. You're saying to yourselves, why is he dressed like that? I'll tell you why I'm dressed like this. I'm a commercial traveller and I'm ready for bed. Now, listen. The last time I played this theatre, I cracked a joke and somebody told the manager. They're not entitled to do that. It's jealousy. And how do I know? Because as a rule, he sits in the box. And tonight, he's not there. Now, I'm going to crack the same joke, but don't you laugh, because if you laugh, you know it's rude.
But I was so sad to see the Bedford shut down, because what they did, they let it go. It just fell into disrepute. You know, I mean, all right, musical. It was still going fairly well, but it was so sad because, you know, you can see what they've put up in its place, you know, and it was really part of Camden town. But I mean, the sort of people I saw there at the Bedford was Wilson, Capel and Betty, the sand dancers. Now, I don't know whether you've ever seen them. They used to have people in fits. They would come out. Betty was dressed as an Eastern lady with midriffs and the blousey, what you see in the Sinbad the Sailor costumes, as I call them. And Wilson and Capel were, they were done up, basically. They had these long moustaches. They never smiled. They used to wear fezzes and like a cut down dhoti, what the Egyptians wear, but they had terribly skinny legs, and they used to wear these great big boots, and they would bring out a board and they would sprinkle sand on it, and then they would play the music and they would dance to it, and it's one of the funniest things you've ever seen. I saw every pantomime they had there for at least 3 years, it was just a wonderful experience. You know, it was live, and that's what I love. I've always said I'd rather go and see a bad amateur dramatics, which we used to have in the square, by the way, called the Camdonians. Albeit they weren't bad, they were good. But I'd rather go and see that in a scout hut than all the big epic pictures nowadays. I just love live theatre.
Well, there we are, that was the Bedford, and thank you all very much for watching.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that you really brought the theatre to life, and I saw many bits that I'd not seen before. I've heard so many people talk about it and say with regret it was a shame that that disappeared and the Camden Theatre survived. But perhaps there'll be questions in the audience that if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you would like.
Or if you have any information about the Bedford that I
Yeah.
don't know about, I'd be glad to hear it.
Did you?
Yes, right. Go ahead.
I don't know whether I'm being heard or not. Am I?
Yes, you can, Hazel.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Did you? Wonderful talk, by the way, and one marvelous snippets of film. Did you say why it had the name Bedford?
No, I've never been able to discover that. Somebody asked me that before. I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the Bedford estate or anything, but I think they probably just picked it because it sounded, respectable. They were very much after respectability when they started. So that may have been it, but I think it's lost in the mists of time.
Yes.
One of the people listening tonight did ask, could perhaps the Camden History Society or someone campaign for an accurate plaque instead of the inaccurate one there? I don't know who put the plaque up, but
I don't know. It was there quite a long time ago. It's mentioned by Jean Aston as being incorrect, and she wrote that in 1999 on the 100th anniversary of the new Bedford.
Oh.
So it was a while ago. Yes, we should have a new one.
Yeah. Well, there.
The clips, by the way, came from all sorts of different sources. Some are available online. Trotty True is available as a DVD. Somebody's got a question.
Ruth, would you like to say something? Did you have your hand up, Ruth? Sorry. No.
I'm just looking at the chat to see if there was anything else in there. Somebody says, presumably VV is miming or clipped sync to a record. 1907, yes, she probably was miming, but it's pretty good.
Sorry, we were muted.
Pardon?
Sorry, we were muted. Come on, ask the question now.
Hello, Malcolm. It's David Hayes here with the question, not Ruth.
Right, David.
Yeah, about the naming of the Bedford Arms. My theory has been that one of the Fitzroy family, the Lord Southampton's family, who owned that side of Camden Town, married into the Bedford family at round about that time. There's a mention of that in our book, Streets of Camden Town.
All right. Well, that's really interesting. Well, that would explain it.
Possibly, my theory.
Thank you.
Right. Well,
somebody mentions the Bedford Cafe next door. I imagine they took the name from the theatre. Probably.
Yeah. Well,
if I may can I just add something?
Yes, please do, Brian.
Yeah, hi. Great talk. Wonderful. And sorry, I'm not trying to hide myself. Yeah, I just wanted to mention in this forum, because somebody may be able to assist me. I've actually written a thriller which is set in 1965, and the climax of the book happens in the Bedford Theatre in its derelict state. And in fact, quite a lot of stuff happens in the Camden Theatre down the road as well. And I need an agent and a publisher, and if anyone knows of somebody who might be interested in that sort of thing, I'd be very grateful to hear about it. I'll put my details in the chat. Look, thus.
Sounds great. I'll buy the book.
It's great. It's very well written.
Good. Well, thank you. Anyway, so if this can, if anyone knows of anyone or it can get circulated, you know how difficult it is to find publishers and things. And it's not, guess what? It's not sexy and violent and all that stuff. It's old style, and I think all the better for it. But it's not fashionable, so I'm having trouble finding an agent.
Nice to see you there, John. I'm talking to John Cowley because we did all those chats, all those interviews together. And I think it was you, John, who sort of said, "Oh yes, the Bedford Theatre. We must find out more. Find out more about that."
Yes. Yes, I had a great fascination with the theatre. Goes back to when I was first taken to the theatre in 1945 when the war ended. I was taken to a theatre, and it became special to me.
And you're still a great theatre goer, aren't you?
Yes, I still try and go every week.
Oh, amazing. Right. Well, if there's not any more questions, can I thank you once again for something that kept us riveted since the beginning of your talk, and for some excellent snips of different scenes that brought it so much to life. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The time just disappeared and we could sit here and watch more. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.